Good afternoon, gamers. We're sitting here today with Pat Naoum, who developed the game The Master's Pupil. Pat's agreed to do a sit down and talk about the development of this very unique game. Welcome, Pat. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much. So thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
No worries. Well, Nate, I guess I want to start right at the start because your journey, I saw on Twitter, it's so unique. 7 years ago, you were deciding what you wanted to do, whether you were all in game development. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I basically my story is like I went through a Bachelor of Creative Arts. I was majoring in painting, and then I went through a film school. I went to AFTRS, the Australian Film, Television, Radio School. And so I was kind of going through a film degree as well, and I was kind of finding different projects that I could work on. And eventually I kind of I started playing Braid and Limbo, and I started playing games again after like not playing them at all. And I thought, oh, I could do this. This would be fun. Um, and then it cut to 7 years later. No, no. And then basically it was this kind of uh, with short films, it's basically there's this strange kind of thing where you can only really make films every like once every 6 months or so. You can't really kind of uh, make films in your, unless you're doing like kind of animation or something, you can't really do it, every day, for an hour or so after work. And so I wanted kind of something that I could jump into like that, something that was kind of broader. And I eventually came up with a way, I eventually came across games and I came up with this idea of a game set inside an eyeball. And I thought, well, I could do this. This is something I could do every day and kind of make this shift into game development if I tried hard enough, which involved, learning how to code, learning how to game design, learning how to puzzle design. Um, so there was this kind of like shifting kind of uh, goals, if you will, towards
Yeah.
towards game development. But yeah, it was kind of a strange process, really.
Well, I always assumed you would have had a background in games development first, so I'm kind of blown away that the background's in arts, and then you're like, "I'll just learn how to make a video game." And and on that,
Yeah.
like the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, because the game's the journey of Claude Monet, and it's set in his eyeball, and you basically you play as this figment that helps him complete those pieces. It's one of the most unique experiences I've ever played. How
Thank you.
how did you even come to that idea? Like, how did you, think I'm going to make a game that's set in an eyeball and go from there?
Yeah, it's been a strange one because I think people think maybe I started with the idea of hand painting game first, but no, it was this kind of idea of like layering on several different ideas. So yeah, originally it started with the idea of a game set inside an eyeball and set across an iris. So I saw these images of like of an iris and this kind of shape that was like a valley, and it looked like this like major giant landscape when they were zoomed in really, really close. And so my idea was to have the game start on the edge of the iris, this colored section of your eye, when you were born, and set over the course of someone's life. So it goes through all the way to the pupil, which is this dark hole, and that would be kind of like, metaphorically the same as like death. And you have this giant like dark hole in the middle of the
Wow.
pupil, as the pupil, sorry. And so I had kind of had this concept, and it was like layering on ideas and like who could this person be that was set inside an eye, or like that was set inside their eye. And so I kind of was going through different people, whether I'd make this like a fictional person or not. So originally I had like someone that was born around World War One, and then kind of we stepped through their entire life up until, through the kind of modern era, into the internet and whatnot until around now. Um, and I kind of had this idea of having like a big bad for the end of the game. So you have this pupil that's kind of like a scary dark void, but then I wanted something that was kind of affecting the eye, or something that was kind of uh, affecting the player as well. And so my grandfather had macular degeneration, which is like a type of blindness that affects you. And so I thought, oh, wouldn't that be interesting to kind of involve that into the game, and it'd be kind of personal, and that would be interesting. Um, but macular degeneration has nothing to do with the front of your eye. So
Oh,
it has entirely to do with the back of your eyeball and nothing to do with the iris that's at the front. So I was like, oh, it's kind of strange to then just fall into the eye and you're kind of losing this like environment. And so that kind of led me on a different path. And from my art school days, I had studied Monet and I had studied that he had cataracts. And so it kind of changed the way he viewed things, especially later on in life. And it helped, maybe or maybe not helped with his art. There's this kind of strange debate on with art nerds. And so I was kind of like in this. That kind of was jogged my memory about the cataracts, and so I started looking into Monet, and he had this really interesting life. Um, he lost a wife really early. He was kind of like went to war. He fought off typhoid that nearly killed him. And so there's all these kind of like stages in his life, these little chapters that I thought would work really, really well for like a game chapters kind of thing. So yeah, basically all these kind of ideas laid on top. A game set inside an eye, set over someone's life. That person could be Manet. The big bad at the end could be his cataracts. And then I had the excuse of using his paintings in the game, as well as painting everything around it, using my painting skills and kind of creating this, painted world that sat around his artwork and his life.
that was with the level design. I noticed like all the painting and what kind of, I guess, what inspired you to do a hand painted, I guess, video game, and what sort of process, I guess, was involved in that too? Because that would have been a painstaking process, I assume.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it was definitely that thing of like wanting to have this world that fit with Monet's paintings. And so layering up those ideas and getting to that point and thinking, well, I have to paint it. It makes so much sense for the rest of the style of the game. Um, but it was a really painstaking process because I would design the level in Unity, all these kind of wiggly shapes and kind of organic curves, and then I loaded them into Photoshop onto about an A4 piece of paper, printed that out on a printer, and then painted over the top of it by hand, and then scanned those back in. Cut them out on Photoshop again and loaded them back into Unity. So it was
Oh
this
wow.
like really elaborate way of like getting back to this, back to the kind of going out of digital and then coming back in again and making sure that it worked the best way and talking about efficiency and trying to get all this done in a certain amount of time. So yeah, it was a very painstaking process, but I think above all it's something that you can't quite achieve digitally because there's been a lot of people online that say like these odd trolling comments that kind of say, oh yeah, but you could have done it digitally and it would have been just the same. But there's a certain type of texture and a certain type of like graininess that just doesn't that you could eventually recreate digitally, but it just wouldn't have the same kind of uh, texture and feel and like that real world graphics. Not that it's like realistic graphics, but it's graphics of the real world that have kind of come in and a part of the game.
Yeah, I think that kind of really adds to the experience of the game. As someone who doesn't have an art background,
Mm.
I was playing it and it was nothing like I've ever played. And you can see the brushstrokes in the level design. And I was telling my friend about it because I said, mate, did you see this guy's released this game? It's set in the eyeball of Claude Monet, and he goes, oh, what is it? I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's hand painted. Like it feels like you're actually playing a painting. And I think, obviously, yeah, you'll get trolls everywhere, but I think that's one of the things that makes the game so unique. Yeah, I think it's incredible. I'll
Yeah.
just fanboy out for a second,
Yeah.
sorry. But
No, I love it because it
but
is like this kind of strange thing that it's kind of rare to come across. Like there are some other games that use hand painted textures and use hand painting or hand drawing. Cuphead famously used a lot of hand drawn stuff. But I think there's that idea that you know, I think the last time people saw paint really, really up close was when they were a kid. So they're kind of having like this weird nostalgic textural kind of like connection with this kind of like it's a game and it's you're playing it and you're having fun, but it's kind of connected to this like the last time that you ever saw paint right up close to your face. So there's this kind of strange like nostalgic trip that happens.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It was like going to the art gallery. Um, but yeah, you also had this kind of, I don't know, I had this relaxing, calm feeling while playing it, except with some of the puzzles, but I got stuck with. But I'd say that's more, that's on me, not on you. Um,
Like frustration, I think is
yeah,
important as well because, that's part of the design. Like that's part of what I had to do to, design the puzzles is to like deal with frustration and like use that as a tool because, if you make the game easy, it's boring. But if you make it too frustrating, people rage quit. So having that sweet middle ground so
yeah.
someone kind of can solve something and get over that and go, aha, isn't that great? Those aha moments are just like they're designer gold, really.
On that development process, when, because I mean, you've already kind of answered a lot of this, but during the actual development of the game, you've changed from one particular idea to another which has evolved. But were there any features that you added along the way or that you took out that perhaps didn't work in just talking about that user design and user experience?
Yeah, yeah, there was quite a lot, and I think that's part of the iterative process of design that I like because you want to throw out as much as you can because that means that you're not being precious about certain ideas and you're not being kind of you're not holding on to the stuff for the sake of it. You're just trying to use it and see if it works for the environment or the game or what have you. So there was all sorts of puzzles that I would make that just wouldn't click together and they wouldn't work or they wouldn't have a certain type of, one of those aha moments. So there was a lot of those kinds of thrown out. But, originally I had this game because of all the curving shapes of the game. I wanted to have this kind of flowing style of levels, and have this kind of more of those, there's these colored jets through the game. And so I wanted to have use a lot of those and have a kind of momentum style game. But I'm not a big fan of like puzzle platformers or platformers specifically, where you have to be quite skilled and you have to kind of really have a lot of uh, well, just plain physical skill to kind of achieve this. If you think about like Super Meat Boy or games like that, where
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just you have to be very, very skilled at playing the game. Um, I even though those games are fantastic, they've just never been my bag. They've never been my, interest. So a lot of the time, I kind of was, well, especially early on, I was trying to design something that would be a bit more of uh, a challenge in the puzzle itself. Not necessarily hard to do, but just interesting in the actual puzzle. So nothing was timed. You had no like jumping or like specific, precision that you had to achieve. It was only about the cerebral puzzle and how to unlock that, not how to play. And so there was this kind of like process of I'd come up with a puzzle and then I would be like, it just feels too close to being a platformer. So I'd take it out. Or, like eventually I took out a lot of that momentum based stuff because it just didn't feel right for the rest of the game. Part of what the whole construction of the game was creating a tutorial that so each puzzle kind of taught you each individual section as you went along. And so creating puzzles around the idea of a mechanic was my first step. So the game has no language, it has no text, it has no dialogue in it. And that even comes down to showing you what is what in the game and how to deal with it. So there's no kind of instruction that a red key will open a red door. And even if you saw a red key and you could see a red door, maybe you would connect those together. But instead, I wanted to kind of have this color unlocking idea where you individually turned red or any kind of color and that can unlock red doors. And so I found that a lot of my puzzles, especially early on, were very, very simple and they were almost too easy for a lot of like good gamers because they would just clock it and understand it exactly right from the get-go and just move through things. But I wanted to make it open for like anyone to play this game. And so tutorializing those first sections was like a heavy focus because I wanted anyone to be able to just pick it up and kind of interact with the game and have it teach you what you needed to know as you went across. Until of course you get to those harder puzzles. Because the first, for me at least, the first hard puzzle I think comes at like the end of level 2. So it's a far way through the game. Everything up until that point is kind of teaching you what to do. And from
Yeah.
that point on, there's more and more hard puzzles. There's still some tutorial stuff, but at least there was this kind of stepping each level as I went along.
Yeah, I remember when it came to adding the three colors in the mix, and you can't combine more than three colors. And I
Yeah,
remember yeah, there was one where there's three jets, and I jumped across, and then and I'm what?
yeah.
But then I knew from then on, and that came into play a lot. I thought it was really well done. Um, on the development, Switch specific development, was it hard to bring it to the Nintendo Switch? And what was the kind of, I guess, what was the choice there? Like, what made you go, this is going to be a great game for the Switch?
Uh, Basically, I got a Screen Australia grant last year, which was kind of mind blowing, and that as a fellow Australian, you've seen that Screen Australia badge like on after a lot of movies, after a lot of TV, and it's the first time last year that they've started doing games funding. And so when I applied for that, it was this like kind of life changing moment when I got it. Um, and that applied for the funding to put it onto to be able to port it in the first place because I wasn't intending ever to port it to consoles because I just didn't know how. I didn't know if it was possible. I didn't know, how to get a dev kit because you need to get like permission from Nintendo and they send you like a special kind of switch that you have to like that can connect to the dev store and whatnot. And you can test things on it. Uh, so that funding allowed me to hire Noble Steed Games in Australia, in Sydney, and so they were the ones that kind of ported it. But it is a long process because I worked quite heavily with them, made sure that all the bug fixing was what was working. It was also nice to have some professionals look over my code because I had come from, this non-coding background, and then I was like, I passed this game across to them, being like, is this okay? And they were like, they looked through it a couple of days. They're like, no, it's okay. It's fine, man.
You're
It's
good.
good.
You're
And I was
good.
just like, oh, yeah,
You
yeah,
got
yeah,
you
yeah.
got approval
Surely I
from
can't be
from the
that far.
nerds. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The geeks were like, dude, you did good. And I was like, okay. Phew.
That's awesome.
But then,
Yeah.
there was this, and it turned out to be only enough budget to kind of work with because I was taking much longer than expected too. Like I was doing a lot more bug fixing and I was trying to make sure that to try and polish as much as the game. And even now that it's out, I'm still doing like this week I've still been doing bug fixes to make sure that everything is nice and polished. Um but it's still a lot to do. So my budget was kind of expanding out. And so we could only kind of choose one of the consoles basically. And Noble Steed said Switch is the best option. Everyone I asked, all the devs that I had met, and I was asking around, like, what's the best option for like an indie game like this? And everybody said Switch. And it paid off too because now it's got almost double the sales that Steam has, which
Oh
I
wow.
thought it was going to be the other way around. Yeah, I thought it was definitely going to be the other way around because I was just thinking it was a smaller market. It's not going to have that same kind of impact. But I think there's something about the Switch that is much more like it's open to a lot more people. It's a lot open to a lot more kids. It's a lot open to a lot more families. So you have a family that might one person sees the game online and then they'll buy it for the family, and then they'll tell their friends, and it's this kind of like word of mouth thing because once you have a Switch, you're part of this like club of people with Switches, and so you get to kind of share this information and hang out and tell people about it, and so it's been quite lovely to have these kind of families being like, oh, I've been playing this with my sisters, and we've been playing. We played it all day Sunday, and we can't wait to do it again the next weekend and stuff like that. So it's been this really fascinating and interesting approach to just put it on one console as well as PC and Mac, and then see what's happened. It's
Yeah.
it's been quite great.
On the subject of sales, when the game got released, I've noticed it's been released to really high praise from critics. And how does that feel after this entire journey? So when the game comes out and then everyone's like, you know what, this is a great game.
It's mind blowing. It really is, and wonderful. Like it's this kind of all the praise that I got. Like so when Instagram and TikTok kind of went viral, I had a bunch of posts that went over 1 million views each, and
Wow.
the last one hit about 5 or 6 million views individually, each on both on TikTok and on Insta. And so that got a lot of this praise, and there was all these people saying how wonderful the game looked, and it was kind of like uh, I've always liked it. That's the reason I I went through this process of making it and hand painting it, I always like the look of it. And I was making this game for me more than anyone. So it's something that I like to look of, something that I like to play, that kind of thing. And so getting all that praise online was fantastic, and it was, reassuring that I was on the right path. And then since it's come out, it's had, it's only on at the moment it's like 20 something reviews, but they're all positive. There hasn't been a negative review yet, and so it'll happen eventually. But but at this point, it's kind of like this fantastic moment of, and it sounds maybe a bit self-aggrandizing or like a bit up myself, but there's this sense of like that I was right, or that my decisions making was right, that I kind of went through this whole laborious like process to then go, well, it's I was right when I thought all those things, all those gut reactions I had, all those choices that I did. I was like, well, that makes sense. People like it. They like it for the same reason I like it, and they're playing it for the same reason I would play it. So, you know, following that kind of intuition and getting the thumbs up from the crowd is just beyond enjoyable and beyond fantastic.
Just on that, it seems like not to talk ill of other developers, but larger developers, I think perhaps they build a game because they have a preconceived idea of what will sell well, whereas you've built a game
Yeah.
that you wanted to play, and seen that kind of go from there. So, I think it's fantastic. I think the more people take leaps in a very unique direction, the better it is for gamers because it's a new experience.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
definitely. Like so
yeah,
AAA games are like this. They have to appeal to everyone, as many people as they can, so they can justify how much it takes to make them. So these giant games are kind of designed so everyone can play them, or everyone, or at least as many people as possible can play them and will buy them. Whereas indie games have this kind of strange other way around, where they're making it for the sake of making something really, really interesting, and they're doing it with a small budget, and they're doing it like on their own, because you're not attempting to make it super popular. You're attempting to make something really, really interesting that a small people will play and love. And games just happen to be in that sweet spot where you can actually potentially earn a living off that, and a few people can create, smaller games that are much more interesting and much more kind of nuanced and dynamic in ways that like AAA games can't be. So you get this kind of strange world where you're making it for like completely different reasons. And not to say that there aren't choices that I've made, or that other indies have made, that aren't monetary based, or part of what painting part of the thing that I wanted to paint it for was because I hadn't seen it done. And I thought, well, that would be interesting. And maybe other people will find that interesting and unique. And uniqueness is like the biggest difference with indie games at the moment. Is like, how can you make a game that stands out and is different? Because you can make a game that is really, really good, but marketing is this whole other beast that makes indie dev really difficult. And there's huge amounts of budgets that get spent on a AAA game making it, but there's also a huge amount on marketing and making sure that people know that it exists. And when you're just chipping away for, in my case, 7 years to get a game complete, and then at the end you have to kind of look at how am I going to get this game and actually get eyeballs on it. How does people know that this game exists?
yeah,
So there are some choices that you need to make it in that way, but generally speaking, you're right. You have to make a game that you like and is important and feels good to you, because otherwise, if you're aiming for something that you don't play, then you're not going to understand why or how it's good.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, we are running out of time, and I'm also conscious of taking up all your time. So I've only got two more questions, if that's all right. And
Whereas,
one of them,
yeah.
I absolutely hate to be this guy because I know you've just released the game. What's next? Have you got an idea of what you want to do, or is it right now it's just 100% on the Master's Pupil?
Well, I've always been joking because, people asking, are you going to do a sequel and whatnot? And my gag has been that this one is set in Claude Monet's eye, but the next one will be Van Gogh's ear. So you can cut it off at the end of the. But that's a nerd joke for you. But like part of what made this game really exciting, or like the Master's Pupil, was that I was designing it for so long. So even though it took me 7 years to make, I came up with the idea 10 years ago. So it
Oh,
was
wow.
like there was 3 years though of like thinking of ways that I could get it, talking to people, trying to find, developers that might be interested in making it. Um, and then when it came down to like, oh, I still want to make this game, and I'd kind of fleshed it out over this course of this time. Then when I started making it, you know, I could kind of roll straight into this idea and start making different prototypes and whatnot. And even those first 3 years were still like learning how to code and learning how to prototype, and that idea was shifting and changing. So I really wanted to make sure that when I had finished this game, I had another idea that was like semi-brewed. I hadn't started anything. I haven't like put any code down. Um, but I've got this kind of idea that's been brewing for the last like few years. And so I'm super excited to just kind of jump into that basically. So I want to hit the ground running and make another game. Um, and knowing more about the industry now, I can kind of, I am going to pitch to publishers and find a way of like funding a bigger game, because that's what this first game was in so many ways, was a way of like getting into the game industry and seeing if I could actually achieve one game. And I bit off more than I could chew and kind of did this giant painted, long game, or longer than most people's first game. And so, you know I'm hoping I can roll into the next one and do a slightly bigger again and make it, bigger and different as well.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait. And hopefully you give us a scoop on it when it all starts. But
I
that's it.
definitely will, Joshua. I definitely will.
You know, and finally, because I've been following a lot of indie devs on Twitter, and just yesterday, one of them was feeling really disheartened, and I thought I'd just ask you what sort of advice, because I'm sure you had a lot of highs and a lot of lows. What's some advice that you can give someone who's kind of in the position you were perhaps 7 years ago, going, can I do this?
It is a hard one because I think I'm in the minority of a lot of developers because I am one of those weirdos that really likes a really big project. So part of the reason I switched to part of the reason that I switched to game development was because I could do it every day. That's what I was saying before. Is like I wanted to switch from film or art to something bigger and more complex, and something that I could just sit down every day and chip away at. Because I think the best advice from me is that you need to really enjoy the work. You need to be interested and involved in the day-to-day problems and the day-to-day solutions and the day-to-day grind of making a game, because there's so many hours that it takes to actually make the game and complete it. And uh, if you don't enjoy that work, then you're just you're gonna hate it. Because if you don't, if you've got an idea of the end game and the end goal that you're achieving, and all you're doing is striving for that, you're years away from that. So enjoy the work, enjoy the day to day, sit down, do the work, and enjoy it, because there's no other options. As
Oh,
sad as that is, you've just got to do it. So try and enjoy it.
that's a good aspect. I always try and tell my son, if you're going to do something that you love. Don't do it because it's going to make you money, because you'll be miserable. So
Yeah,
it's
and look,
fantastic insight.
that's exactly what my parents said, almost word to word. It was
Yeah,
just like, you do what you love because you've got to do it all the time, so you might as well enjoy it.
might as well enjoy it. That's it.
Uh,
Pat, thank you so much for sitting down with us today and talking about the Master's Pupil. For those of
you're
you
very
who are
welcome.
watching this interview, the Master's Pupil is available on Steam and the Nintendo eShop. I'll put a link in the comments below. Grab it, especially if you're an Aussie. Get behind our homegrown Aussie game devs. It's a fantastic journey, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. Pat, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.